What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Take Talk Sports Podcast. This episode, I'm back with another sports update. I've been doing a few different kinds of videos, and I'm really enjoying doing them, and I will continue to do them. But today, there's been a lot going around in the world of sports, and so I wanted to catch up on all of it in this video. In the video, I'm going to touch a little bit on the NBA playoffs, mostly on the playoffs, a little bit on the NFL and the news that came out today, and then a little bit on soccer. Now, first things first, NBA playoffs. Biggest thing I think that's happened is obviously the Lakers getting knocked out of the playoffs by the Suns in the first round. You know, credit to the Suns. They had a great series. Obviously, they beat the Lakers and they beat LeBron. The first time LeBron has lost in the first round of the playoffs in his career. He's now 14-1 in the first round. But if I'm honest, they wouldn't have beat him without the injuries. I think Lakers with Anthony Davis probably win that game in 6 games, 4-2. Instead, Lakers go down 4-2. And unfortunately, I think what it showed is LeBron is a bit too old to carry a team by himself. Now, maybe we knew that already, but I think this definitely proved it. However, for me, I don't think that's news. I think, like I talked about, if you watch the video that I did with Omar, I talked about how for the Lakers to win, Anthony Davis has to be the best player on the floor at all times. And that's because LeBron is at a point where he can't carry the load for 48 minutes. And that's why having a guy like Anthony Davis who can, and he can score, you get the scoring of Anthony Davis and the leadership and passing of LeBron. And then LeBron comes up when you need the big shot, you need the clutch moment. LeBron is there and you've got LeBron for it. That's what he is now. He can't quite carry a team a whole game, but he's going to be there at the end of games. And when he didn't have AD in the series, we saw that, he just can't necessarily get it done by himself, which is, no surprise. But Lakers out in the first round, Suns have a good chance to make a deep run. It'll be interesting to see what happens there. All right, next series I want to touch on is the Mavericks and Clippers. At the time of recording this video, they're playing Game 7 tonight. This has been one of the more fun series to watch. Just so that in case people watch this as soon as it's already done, I don't want to drag on too much about what I think will happen. I just want to touch on the fact that I think Luka has no help and desperately needs a number 2 on his team to take the pressure off himself. Because he's getting double teamed every time, and it's impossible for him to do anything when that's happening. He needs someone who can score by themselves to take that pressure off him. Final note is hopefully the Mavs win that series. Next series that I want to touch on is the Bucks and the Nets. Game 1 was yesterday, and the Bucks lost. I'm not reading too much into that result because the Bucks had probably their worst shooting night, in a long time. They were not making shots. No one was making shots, and yet they were close until the end. Then again, the Nets didn't have Harden, so who knows what it would have looked like with him. However, I do think that the Bucks still can and probably will win this series, especially if the Nets don't have Harden. I think they're one of the better shooting teams and offensive teams in the league, and last night it just wasn't going for them, and I think that'll turn around. However, that being said, I think the Bucks need Giannis to play like the superstar he is. And last night he did. He did play like a superstar, but I think he needs to do even more than he did last night. So one more note on that series is I think it's a very pivotal series. I think people don't exactly know how important this series is to the rest of the NBA. And that might sound a bit crazy, but I've heard other analysts like Brian Windhorst talk about this. But I think if the Nets win this series and especially go on to win or even just get to the finals, other teams are going to start to model or copy their model, which is offense only. That is their model. They have almost no defense, and it's all offense all the time. And hopefully that gets you a win. And if they win, I think teams try and copy that. However, if the Bucks win, I think teams will go after the Bucks model, seeing that it can beat teams like the Nets. And the Bucks model is pace and defense. And, we saw it. They got a bunch of versatile defenders this year with Jrue Holiday and PJ Tucker and other shooter players who are very versatile, and they play with a bunch of pace. And if teams see that that's what beats the Nets, then they'll want to copy that. And if they see the Nets win, they'll want to copy what the Nets are doing. So I think it's a really interesting series to see what happens, and I think it will have long-term effects on the league that not a lot of people are talking about. All right, finally, I'm going to revamp my finals prediction given that the Lakers got knocked out. Now, I'm not a huge Jazz believer, but looking at how the rest of the teams in the West have performed, very up and down, I'm going to pick the Jazz. I think all around they're probably the best team and most consistent team. Whereas all the other teams like the Clippers, if they get through, I don't think they will, but if they do, they're too inconsistent, I think, to beat a team like the Jazz. And the same goes for the Nuggets, too inconsistent to beat a team like the Jazz. I think the only teams that can beat the Jazz are in the East. And that being said, I'm going to stick with my East team as the Bucks in the finals. It would match up and be Jazz versus Bucks. And I think if that does end up being the matchup, I think the Bucks win. And obviously Giannis gets his first title. That's it for the NBA playoffs. Let me get into the NFL real quick. Not a lot to say on it. Just one big note that happened earlier today is Julio Jones was traded to the Tennessee Titans for a second round. And the second piece isn't exactly confirmed yet, but it's either a fifth rounder or a pick swap. Either way, that is so cheap. And I feel like every other team's fan bases feel like their team should have done it. And when you see a trade like this, and a top tier player go to another team for a second and fifth round pick, how are teams not jumping on this and sending a first rounder for Julio Jones? I mean, who are you going to draft in the second round that is going to be better than what you would get with Julio Jones? Sure, he may be injured a bit during the season, but you're getting him for that postseason, especially if you're a contender. And that's what the Titans did. They made a smart move and they got him for dirt cheap. And now their offense is going to be scary with AJ Brown and Julio Jones and Ryan Tannehill throwing to all of them. That's going to be a fun offense to watch. And it's some big news coming out of the NFL. It was obviously expected to happen, but not necessarily knowing where he would go. And now we know it's the Tennessee Titans. Last note to touch on is a little bit of soccer in the international world. Coming up in the next week is the start of the Euro 2020. I know it's 2021. The Euros were supposed to be in 2020, and they have been moved to 2021, obviously because of COVID. If you don't know what the Euros are, which I'm sure most of you do not, it is almost the equivalent of the World Cup. However, it's just the European teams given Euro. It doesn't quite have as much weight as the World Cup, obviously because it's just Europe, but I would say it's just as close as you can get to the World Cup without being the World Cup. It's highly coveted between the teams. Huge competition. It happens every 2 years, and it's going to be really exciting to see what happens in this finals. In these Euros, there's a lot of favorite teams, and if you haven't gotten into football and you watch my last video and you're curious about getting into it, I highly recommend checking out these matches because they are the best players in the world all playing on one team for the same country. You know, the best players in the world generally come from the same countries, and that's England, France, Germany, Belgium, Portugal. There's a few countries that a bunch of the best players in the world are from, and obviously Brazil and other countries, but they're all going to be playing on the same team, and they're going to be playing against other teams with big teams, and there's going to be superstars all over the place. And if you haven't watched any football and you're curious about getting into it, I highly recommend checking out those matches. And if you're looking for someone to root for England. One little last note is Gini Wijnaldum of Liverpool has signed for Paris Saint-Germain. It was looking like he would go to Barcelona. However, given the fact that Barcelona is struggling with money, I can imagine that they were outbid by PSG, and that's why Gini went there. He's a great player, great pickup for them. I'm excited to see what he does with that team. Anyway, that's it for me, guys. This has been a little sports update for you. I'll be coming with more videos, obviously, in the future with some cool ideas. If you have any ideas or topics you want me to do a video on, please let me know in the comments, and I will be sure to check them out and do it. Make sure you guys like and subscribe, and I will see you next time.